Hello, my name is Andrew. You can call me Cookies, and we're going to be taking a look at Mythic Tarragrue logs and just talking about how to analyze and properly dive through these and find useful information. So this is primarily aimed towards like guilds or raid leaders or people who want to analyze how other players are performing. You can do this for yourself to see how you're performing, but it's much more beneficial if this is like kind of like a group-wide thing, like you're trying to find out what you as a group can do to improve. So the first really major thing on this fight is using defensives on Grasp of Death, which is like the heavy hitting ability, the heavy hitting dot debuff that you get. So we want to just make sure that players in our group are pressing their defensives as early and often as possible when they get this debuff, because the more, like the faster they press it when they get their first debuff, the more often they'll have that defensive back up throughout the entire fight, since this is like an average of a 6-minute fight. You can, if you're using your defensives on cooldown, depending on the class, you could get upwards to like 6 or 7 casts of your defensive by the end of the fight, which is absolutely huge. So the first class that we'll take a look at is just Druid, because that's like a class that has their defensive up very, very, very often, because they have Bark Skin, which is a 1-minute cooldown. So basically, all we're gonna do here is we are gonna go to, we'll start by going to cast. We'll click on the player that we want to see. We'll go to cast up here at the top. We're going to find Bark Skin and just click on this little plus sign on the right hand side. And what that does is add to the timeline when Bark Skin was pressed. So we can see here, just by looking at this, it wasn't pressed until 2 minutes into the fight. That's probably bad, more than likely. And then it wasn't pressed again until 4 minutes, which means it was left like off cooldown for an entire minute, which probably something happened in here that we could have pressed our defensive for. And then we didn't press it again for almost another 2 minutes. So it seems like we might be a little bit delayed on it, but let's just make sure by checking the debuffs. So we're going to go to debuffs, leave this player selected still, and then we're going to go ahead and find Grasp of Death. We're going to hit the plus sign to add it to the timeline. And we can also add Soulforge Heat if we would like to, because that is a debuff that is also important to use defensives through if we have, if we have this. Okay, so first Grasp of Death happens roughly at about, this is somewhere around like 20 seconds into the fight. So this should have been our first Bark Skin right here. This little spot, I have to reset the zoom one time. This little spot right here should have definitely been a Bark Skin. And what we can also check, just to help out a little bit, is we can go to resources up here at the top after we've added everything to the timeline. Keep this player selected, and then we just have hit points selected here. And then now we'll have this table down at the bottom that will show where our hit points are at. And we can see here that through this Grasp of Death, the lowest this player dipped down to was 20% HP. That is pretty much as close to death as you can get without actually dying in raid. So the fact that like all this damage was happening that could have been avoided with just a simple Bark Skin is really, really important to point out. And then we can look at the next one. So we have the next Grasp of Death at, this would be at about 1:45, 1:50. So we zoom in a little bit, and all I'm doing to do that is just drag and dropping. And then we see here, the Bark Skin was actually really well timed. So we had Grasp of Death go out. We started dipping low in HP. Technically, you should say that, you should just use your Bark Skin right here at the start. But when Soulforge Heat comes in, we take 2 stacks of that, and then the player uses Bark Skin. That is a very effective use of it, is soaking this debuff and then going, okay, now I have 2 stacks of this debuff, and I have Grasp of Death. I should probably press my defensive. That's smart. Overall, we would like to see it just kind of pressed at the beginning, because that just means that we have a good habit. But nonetheless, this is still ends up being a good use of it. And then we reset the zoom once again, and then we can see we soak 3 more sets of this debuff. So now we're at a total of 5 stacks of this Soulforge Heat, which is an absolute ton of damage that we're taking. This is without having a Grasp of Death right here. This whole section right here is no Grasp of Death. And look at the HP just dipping down, dipping down. We're going to like 50% HP just over and over and over again, and making our healers do a ton of work. And the issue with that is that we used Bark Skin. The last time we pressed Bark Skin was at 2 minutes. And we're dipping this low, and Bark Skin's back available right here at 3 minutes, and we haven't pressed it yet. Just due to the fact that we have 5 stacks of this debuff, we should just be pressing Bark Skin immediately. And then we have the next Grasp of Death here at 4 minutes, and this is a perfect use of Barkskin in terms of like if you took everything else out of it being available. We get Grasp of Death, we immediately press Barkskin within 5 seconds of getting the debuff. That's good. And we're still, because of all the stacks and stuff, we're still dipping down incredibly low. So if Barkskin wasn't used here, like this is probably a death. And then we get a last Barkskin at 5:30, which is poor, I would say. We should be trying to use Barkskin right here at 5 minutes as soon as it's back off cooldown, because again, we have 5 stacks of Soulforge heat, so there's just no reason why we shouldn't press defensive immediately. And then we would have another use for it at 6 minutes, so it just continues to save us and save our healer's mana and save resources for our group. It even looks that like a death potentially happens here, I believe. And that, I mean, that couldn't necessarily have been avoided with Barkskin, but the idea is the same as like if every player played in the way where we use 6 Barkskins here instead of 3, it saves the healers a ton of mana, a ton of resources, and this death could have been because someone else didn't pop a defensive during this time, so the healers were like too preoccupied with healing too many people. So there's just so many things that go into it, and that's why we just have to try to do our best at remembering to, okay, I get Grasp of Death, this very first one, press defensive immediately. I get the second Grasp of Death, I press defensive immediately. I go to 5 stacks of this debuff, I press defensive as soon as I can, and now just because I have this permanent debuff on me, I'm just going to press my defensive the second it comes up so I get as many casts of it as possible, and just help reduce my overall damage intake. And then because we covered so much with just that one look, I'm not going to look at other players. That's the whole idea. You can do that with any class and spec, so you would just do all of those steps over again for whatever class you want to see. You could look at Mage's Alter Time, you could look at Warriors Enrage Regen, you could look at Cloak, you can look at all that kind of stuff. So that's how that works. And then the next thing that we're going to take a look at that's really important with analyzing logs on Tarragrue is going to be the replay function to watch how people dealt with the chains debuff to make sure that they were going in the right spot. Typically what you do in this fight is you mark a spot on the floor. Here's where we marked on the floor. And basically the whole idea is the person with chains is supposed to go stand on this marker or close to it. And then the person who is blocking chains, which will be this guy right here, our Resto Shaman, they stand in the way of this marker. So here's the first chains. We run out. There it is. It's lined up with the player. Cool, we dealt with it correctly. One thing we could technically check is, like, during this replay, is how effective are people being at getting to the destination and back to where they need to be. So, if you say as a mage, since you're in Lust, say you have, a Rune of Power down like this right here. It's probably going to expire, like, by the time that we're done looking at this, or by the time they need to move. But say their Rune of Power is still down. Yeah, it just disappeared right there. Say their Rune of Power is down, like they just put it down. They just cast it and put it down, and now they get marked with chains. What you would want to see here is you would want to see the mage press Alter Time and then blink out. And that's another thing to check is, like, is the mage using blink to get over here, or are they just walking all the way over? Because if they're just going here and walking all the way up to the marker, that's a problem, and you would want to point that out and say, hey, we shouldn't be walking here. You have a class that's very good at mobility. You should be blinking out. And then the next step, I would take it a step further and say, maybe you should alter time back here and then blink forward, let the chain hit the person, and then you alter back, and now you're back where you want to be, if that's where you want to be. But if you can just stay over here for a little while and hang out, that's cool too. It doesn't really matter. But that's the other thing is, like, because we didn't use alter over here to get back, are we going to see this player stand still and DPS the boss from here, or are they going to be inefficient and walk all the way back to where they were and go, okay, I need to blink back to where I was, or I need to go walk back over there, when that's technically not necessary. They could just stay here and plant their feet and DPS the boss. It's okay if they're by the marker, as long as they're not in the way of the marker. That's all that matters. So they put Rune of Power down. It looks like they're going to stay here, and they're going to DPS. That's good. The next thing we can watch is who gets the debuff next after this. We just fast forward a little bit and see where the next chains were. There's the chains going out. It's on the Mistweaver Monk. They roll over to the mark. They stand there. Person gets hit. They're all done. Go back into melee, and that's totally fine. So that is how you check chains. And then the last thing I wanted to show you guys is how to check the Remnant debuff stat count. So like my guild, for instance, we do a specific strategy for like who's supposed to be soaking the remnants. I think the way that we do it off of my memory, if my memory serves me correctly, we have tanks soak the purple ones, we have melee DPS soak the black ones, and then we have ranged DPS and ranged healers soak the red ones, which is like the damage over time effect. So the way we go and check if those were dealt with correctly is we go to debuffs, and then all we're going to do is, there's a couple ways of doing this. So the first way is we're just going to click on each debuff and just check. So let's say, you know, tanks were only supposed to be soaking the upper reaches might, which is this is the purple one. So we're going to click on that and see, were tanks just picking, oh, maybe this must be the, okay, maybe I have this incorrect. So this one, okay, yes, this is the purple one, I'm sorry. Moarcookiez-Hyjal-US Echoes is the purple debuff. So we click on it and we say, okay, were tanks only soaking this? Yes, the tanks were soaking it the entire time. No one else has stacks of this. That is very good. We go to the next one. We say, okay, this is the black one. Were the correct people, which are melee DPS and melee healers, were they soaking this one? Were there any range in here that were soaking? No. Were there any melee who did not soak? So that's another good thing to point out, which is the way I would do that is probably just pull up a second tab like this and just look at our roster on the summary page, and then just kind of go through and check if there were any melee that didn't help soak. But it looks like we were all good. I guess you could count a Mistweaver Monk as a melee healer, but that's not that's not like at the end of the world. And then lastly, we can check the red debuff. Were ranged DPS soaking this? Were there any melee? Which range weren't soaking that much? There's some people who only have 1 stack. There's someone with 18 stacks. And there's somebody with 8 stacks. Like, this is really uneven, so I'd like to see these players soaking more and this player soaking a lot less. I'd be really surprised if they did not end up dying to this, because this looks very intense. See if they ended up dying. Yeah, they definitely... Okay, they didn't end up dying until the end of the fight, actually, so that's actually really big. Interesting. Okay. Can they ice block off their stacks? Is that what's happening? Am I doing that correctly? It looks like their stacks drop off completely. So I'm wondering if they ice block. So to check this, because I'm interested, let's just check this out even though I didn't have plans for it. We're going to keep their debuffs here like this, just to see the stack count, see when it fell off and whatnot. We're going to go to cast. We're going to go to ice block. Ice block, ice block, ice block. Is there no ice block? No ice block. I don't know what removed the stacks then. That's very interesting. Huh. I'll have to look into that. That is... I don't know what caused their stacks to drop off like that. Cool. Okay. So then what else do we have? I believe that is pretty much it. I guess the only other thing that's important to check is you can see, you know, like who soaked which ones. So you can see, I believe if you go to stacked, that's the best way to look. Yeah, so here we go. So this is like, you know, this is the first red soak that came out, and there's always 5 debuffs that go out. So we have the Warlock and the Mage both got some stacks on the first one. And then we have the second one was, it looked like the Balanced Druid and the Mage. And we can also scroll over this to like see which mage it was that got them. And then you can just see like, is the same person soaking too many times in a row, or is it kind of swapping back and forth between who's getting, you know, more stacks each time and stuff like that. So you want to see the, you know, like the players switching each time that there's a set. It shouldn't be the same player soaking every single set. So relatively, this is pretty good. And yeah, I think that's about it for Mythic Tarragrue. Obviously, this boss is like a pushover for most groups, even casual groups once they really get into it. But we're going to be just taking a look at how to analyze logs for every boss, just to give good examples of cool stuff you can do in logs. And yeah, so hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you enjoyed that. And thank you for watching. Have a good one.